At 0413 hours local time, a wall of fire climbed over the northern edge of the Siberian city of Omsk. A tower of black smoke rose an estimated 400 feet into the pre-dawn sky, lit orange from below. Inside the burning complex sat the primary crude processing unit of Russia's largest oil refinery, and it was now tearing itself apart. To understand why this strike mattered, you have to understand the distance. The drones that started this fire had flown approximately 3,000 kilometers, nearly 1,900 miles, from Ukrainian-held territory to reach a target sitting almost on the border with Kazakhstan. The Omsk Oil Refinery processes more than 22 million tons of crude oil annually and accounts for roughly 10% of Russia's total refining capacity. For years, it was considered untouchable, not because it hid behind the thickest air defenses in Russia, but simply because it was too far away. That was the wall Ukraine wanted to break. Not a missile screen, not a fortress of radars, a wall made of pure distance, the belief that anything beyond the Ural Mountains was safe. On this morning, 8 cheap drones built partly from plywood were about to prove that belief was already dead. To Russia, the Omsk refinery was not just another fuel plant. It was one of the crown jewels of the entire war economy. By Ukraine's own account, it is the largest oil refinery in the country, a sprawling complex owned by Gazprom Neft that turns more than 22 million tons of crude into gasoline, diesel, aviation kerosene, and petrochemicals every year. Its refining depth runs at around 99%, one of the highest figures anywhere in Russia. More than half of the fuel burned across the entire Siberian Federal District flows out of this single site, and some of that fuel goes straight to the Russian military. But the real value of Omsk was hidden deeper, and Moscow understood it perfectly. This refinery is the only place in Russia that produces catalytic cracking catalysts, the specialized materials that other refineries across the country depend on to run their own secondary refining. In other words, Omsk did not just make fuel. It kept the rest of Russia's refineries alive. Damage this one plant, and the shockwave could ripple outward into a dozen others that had nothing to do with the strike. It was a single point of failure hiding in plain sight thousands of miles from the front. That is what made its location feel like armor. For years, Omsk sat behind a wall Moscow trusted completely. Not a wall of missiles, but a wall of geography. It was one of only 2 of Russia's 10 largest refineries that had never been touched by a Ukrainian drone. The Ural Mountains stood between it and the war. The region felt so far removed from the fighting that Omsk issued its first ever drone threat alert only weeks earlier on June 10th. An alarm that passed without a single confirmed strike. Local officials, local engineers, local air defense crews had spent the entire war watching the destruction on television. Ryazan burned, Volgograd burned, Novorossiysk burned. Omsk kept refining. This was the fortress Moscow believed could never be reached. A fortress guarded by nothing more than the map itself. And on the morning of July 6th, that map stopped protecting it. Now look at what broke that fortress. Not a cruise missile, not a stealth bomber, a drone that costs about $55,000, roughly a third the price of a Russian Shahed, with a skeleton milled from plywood, a 2-cylinder engine, and wings you could carry under one arm. This is the FP-1, built by a Ukrainian company that did not exist as a defense manufacturer when the full-scale invasion began. 4 years later, it was setting Siberia on fire. On the other side sat the Su-57, Russia's only operational 5th-generation stealth fighter, one of the scarcest and most expensive aircraft in its arsenal, a jet Moscow has advertised for years as among the best in the world. On the morning of July 6th, that jet would be scrambled to chase machines made partly of wood. Hold that image. It tells you how much this war has changed. The math was never about matching Russia system for system. Ukraine cannot outbuild the Russian Air Force, and it does not need to. The logic is asymmetric. You don't have to destroy the whole oil industry. You only have to send a cheap drone across a distance everyone called impossible and put it through the one unit that matters. You don't have to defeat the Su-57 in a dogfight. You only have to make it irrelevant by arriving in numbers it can never catch. On paper, 3,000 kilometers was a wall, and a stealth fighter should own the sky it defends. But the battlefield does not run on advertised numbers. It runs on reaction times and on how many targets one jet can service before the rest slip past. Ukraine was about to turn Russia's advantages into liabilities with the cheapest tools on the battlefield. Start with the weapon. The FP-1 is a one-way attack drone designed to make a single flight that ends in a detonation. Its published maximum range is around 1,600 kilometers, but the aircraft that reached Omsk had flown nearly twice that, close to 3,000 kilometers. This was an upgraded variant stretched far beyond the standard specification. It carries a modular warhead of 60 to 120 kilograms, set for fragmentation or for a shaped charge that punches through steel. Its airframe uses radar-absorbent materials to stay faint on a screen, and it is cheap enough and built fast enough, roughly 100 a day at peak, that Ukraine can afford to lose most of a formation and still succeed. But range and cost are not the hard part. Navigation is. Fly a drone 3,000 kilometers across a continent, and the greatest threat is not a missile, it is losing your own position. Russia blankets vast areas with satellite navigation jamming and spoofing, feeding a drone false coordinates until it wanders off into empty steppe. The FP-1 answers with layered guidance, inertial navigation that needs no outside signal, satellite correction when available, and a newer generation that is effectively GPS independent, matching terrain images against a stored map through a cheap night camera. Firepoint cycled through 7 generations of navigation in about 3 years, every one forged under live Russian jamming. Now the defense waiting at the far end. This is where Omsk was different from a target like Crimea. There was no dense wall of long-range S-400s, no belt of Buk and Pantsir batteries around the plant. Omsk had been shielded by distance, not hardware. So when the drones closed in, Russia reached for its most advanced tool in the sky, the Su-57. Photographs from that week showed it in an anti-drone configuration. 4 short-range R-73 and R-74 air-to-air missiles on external hardpoints and an electro-optical targeting pod, likely the 101 KS-N under the left engine. It was the first confirmed time Russia used its 5th-generation fighter to hunt Ukrainian drones, a stealth aircraft reconfigured into a flying shotgun sent up to guard an oil refinery. Here is the tension that decided everything. When the swarm entered the jamming, the coordinates on every drone drifted. A Russian crew on the ground needed seconds to detect a contact, confirm it, and hand it to a shooter, but a drone with no satellite fix could still hold its heading on inertial data alone, flying blind and flying true. Seconds of hesitation against a machine that did not need to see the sky to know where it was going. That gap was the whole battle. By the final hour, the formation had already crossed most of a continent. 8 upgraded FP-1 drones, spread wide so no single failure could take them all, bored in toward Omsk at low altitude while the sky stayed black. This was the quiet part of the mission, and the most fragile. Somewhere over the last few hundred kilometers, the coordinates on the lead drone began to crawl. Russia's wide-area navigation jamming had found them, dragging their satellite fix off into false positions, trying to convince each aircraft it was somewhere it was not. On an ordinary drone, that is a death sentence. A machine that trusts a spoofed signal will steer itself politely into an empty field 40 miles from the target. But these drones were built for exactly this. When the satellite fix rotted, they fell back on inertial guidance and terrain matching, flying on memory, on motion, on a stored map read through a cheap night camera. For long stretches, they navigated with no outside signal at all. The jamming could blind the satellites. It could not blind a machine that had stopped listening to them. Think about the math underneath that. A ground crew needs seconds to notice a faint contact, decide it is real, and pass it to a shooter. But a drone flying on inertial data does not slow down while it is being jammed. It keeps its heading and keeps its speed. Every second Russia spent arguing with a fuzzy radar return, the formation carved another half mile off the distance. Seconds spent deciding, miles already gone. Then Russia played its highest card. With the drones now inside the last stretch, the aerospace forces scrambled a Su-57, the country's only operational 5th-generation stealth fighter, and sent it up as a last line of defense over the refinery. This is the twist almost nobody expected. Not a missile battery, but Russia's most advertised jet, reconfigured into a drone hunter with short-range missiles bolted to its wings and an electro-optical pod slung under the engine. Picture the pilot. His hand is on the weapons control, an aircraft worth more than an entire drone factory strapped around him, and his target is a plywood machine crawling low over the industrial outskirts of a Siberian city. He locks one up, he fires, one drone comes apart in the dark, then he swings for the next, and this is where the whole logic of the strike turns against him. A single jet, however advanced, can only be in one place, chasing one contact at one time. Behind that first kill, the rest of the formation is still coming, spread across the sky, each one a separate problem he cannot solve fast enough. Imagine you are that pilot for a moment. You have the best aircraft your country ever built, and you are being asked to swat a swarm one at a time while a refinery burns behind you. By the accounts that came out of Ukraine and open-source trackers, the Su-57 managed to bring down just one drone. The others kept flying. What do you think the fifth-generation fighter was actually worth in that moment? And drop your answer in the comments, because analysts are still arguing about it. Now the ground defenses around the northern industrial district woke up. Crews fired into the low sky, and afterward Russia told a clean story. Most of the drones destroyed, no serious harm done. The governor of the Omsk region announced that Russian air defense had shot down the attacking UAVs and that the consequences were being clarified. But that is not what the cameras saw. The footage climbing onto social media within the hour showed no swarm swept from the sky. It showed a large fire already burning inside the refinery, the exact place the drones had been sent. Two versions of the same morning. In one, the defense worked. In the other, the fuel was already alight. And by the arithmetic that mattered, how many drones needed to reach one unit to start a chain reaction, Russia only had to miss a few. The defenders did not need a bad night to lose. They only needed to be a few seconds too slow against machines that had flown 3,000 kilometers and had no intention of turning back. 3 drones out, then 2, then 1. One drone had already been torn out of the sky by the Su-57, but that loss was calculated before the mission ever launched. Ukraine did not send 8 aircraft expecting all 8 to arrive. It sent 8 so that when the fighter took its shot and the ground guns took theirs, enough would still be left to reach the primary crude processing unit. Photo and video evidence later confirmed at least 7 drones struck the complex. They came in low over the northern industrial district, past the last interceptors, and bored in on the ELOU-AVT-11 unit, the first stage distillation train where raw crude is heated and split before anything else can happen. This was the deliberate aim point. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces put it plainly. Without primary refining, every other unit in the plant has no raw material to work with. Destroy the front of the line and the whole line stops. Now the physics, only at the level a camera would show it. A shaped charge warhead does not knock a distillation column over. It punches through the steel skin and drives its energy inward, into a structure packed with hydrocarbons under heat and pressure. The first hit opened the unit. What poured out met air and flame, and the fire did not start in one tidy place. It bloomed across the technological columns at once, running along the pipework faster than any crew could react. The second drone arrived into that fire, then the next. Each impact fed the last, turning a single breach into a blaze the emergency crews could not get ahead of. And this is the difference between hitting a fuel tank and hitting this unit. A burning storage tank is a loss, a wrecked primary distillation train is a paralysis. Because this was the one facility feeding everything downstream, the damage reached backward into the plant's entire purpose. The columns that turn crude into gasoline, diesel, and the aviation kerosene that fuels Russian aircraft all depend on that first stage. Knock it out, and the refinery does not just have a fire to fight, it has nothing to refine. By dawn, black smoke still climbed over Omsk, and the story Moscow wanted to tell was dissolving in the heat rising off Russia's largest refinery. The wall of distance was gone. The stealth fighter had managed one kill, and the most important unit in one of the most important plants in the country was burning from the inside out. So what did 8 cheap drones actually destroy that morning? Not just a distillation unit, they destroyed an idea. The idea that anything beyond the Ural Mountains was out of the war. For years, distance was Russia's cheapest and most reliable air defense system. Omsk never needed a wall of S-400s because it had 2,000 miles of geography. On July 6th, that wall came down, and it will not go back up. This is the difference between destruction and paralysis. Destroying a fuel tank costs Russia a tank of fuel. Striking the one plant that makes the catalysts every other refinery depends on, and burning the primary unit that feeds the entire site reaches much further than the flames. And Omsk was not a single event. It was the last of Russia's largest gasoline producers to be hit in a campaign that struck Russian refineries at least 194 times in the first half of this year. The International Energy Agency has called the disruption unprecedented. By early July, fuel shortages and rationing had spread across the vast majority of Russia's regions, with several declaring emergencies. Even President Putin acknowledged the shortages while calling them not critical. And the timing was its own message. This strike landed on the eve of a NATO summit in Ankara, a reminder to everyone watching that Ukraine could now reach a target near the Kazakhstan border on the day of its choosing. Russia is now facing a problem it cannot solve with more missiles at the front. To defend Omsk, it had to send its only fifth-generation fighter to chase Plywood over Siberia. Every jet, every radar, every interceptor pulled back to guard the deep rear is one no longer aimed at Ukraine. So here's the question worth sitting with. If a refinery 3,000 kilometers away is no longer safe, how much of Russia does Moscow now have to defend, and with what? Drop your answer in the comments. If you found this breakdown worth your time, hit like, subscribe, and share it so more people understand how this war is actually being fought.